Hey y'all, today we're going to talk about making a gradient or a progression yarn out of a standard hand paint. So you've got standard hand paints like these and like this one. I'm going to make a gradient. And the first thing you need to do is kind of decide how you want to break up the colors. Kind of look at it, be critical, maybe even start pulling it apart and see. I chose to do it in 5 sections, and I rewound this bobbin after I applied it, but I didn't rewind it really well because I wanted you to be able to see kind of the progression of colors. This, I went from the blue to the blue and black mixed, black all by itself, which that's the part that kind of, I got a little crazy there. And then the black and peach together, and then peach by itself. So it's really kind of simple, but you are breaking up your fiber. So this is the other half. I did it half and half just so that I could show you guys how I did it. And it's just pulling out sections. And see, this has the blue and black on it. So if I was being super duper critical, I might even keep that in a different, like, middle group. But here's the black. This one has a bunch more white on it. But I like bunching it up like this. I'm going to leave that has some peach in it. So there's the black. There's a little black and peach. And that's a little black and peach. And there's some more that are just... And this one's more black and peach. This one's peach. And so on. And keep making your piles as you go. And then when I went to spin, I set them up on the side of me in order. Like I did the blue and the black, the peach and black, and the peach. And I just set them up so I would go from one to the other. And you can spin them from the fold, which makes them fluffier. I have a little video on that, on getting loft. Or you could just spin them from end and keep them sort of, into a worsted spin. So, it is pretty much that simple. However, if you notice as I've been pulling these things out, pulling out pieces, you can see that the colors often, this has black and white on it. So a lot of them won't be. I just got fiber on my nose. It's tickling. Sorry, guys. Whew. A lot of them won't be just one color. Look at that. If I kind of pulled it off to show you, it's one staple length. And at one end it's black, and at one end it's white, because it's a long staple length. So that's the first thing you have to think of. Oh, the fiber's tickling me. When you do this, the fiber does kind of go up, and it does tickle. So this is Blueface Leister, BFL. It's got the longer staple length, and there are going to be a lot of sections where it's two-tone dyed. So unless it's got really long sections, like this really long section, I'm pretty sure there's a lot in here that are just plain blue. But as we get to the multi-sections, or where the two colors are coming together, you're going to have more of the blendy parts. So that's why I have everything. This is a blendy part. This is the black, even though it's black and white in this one. I might even kind of take this out, because this is almost all black. This bunch is more black and white, or this one's more white. So I might even make another color out of it. Same with all of these. You know, some of them are going to have, like, say, more peach than black, more black than peach. You can section those off. So it'll make your gradient or progression of colors look a little bit more cohesive, like that's how it was dyed. So the more bundles you have, the more custom your, you know, piece is going to look, and the more blendy gradient it's going to be, where it doesn't have the definite, whoop, this is blue, whoop, this is peach. You know, you can make them blendy sections. And that's kind of, if you got something from a dye house, that's sort of how it would be. You'd have the blendy sections in there because that's the way it went. So, if you are using Blueface Leicester or Wensleydale, it's really long. I mean, Wensleydale, obviously, that's, you know, the far end of it all. But you've got really long sections of color, a really long staple length, which, if you don't have a long section of color, the colors are going to be blocked up and often on the same staple length. So you're going to have to work in some of the blendy sections. If you have a shorter staple fiber, you might be able to break it up a little bit easier, simply because, you know, if I had merino, I mean, it's more likely that I'm going to have just a shorter, you know, 3 or 4 inch section, which could be all gray, or a 3 or 4 inch section that could be all blue. It's going to be less likely to have more blendy. Now, do you want more blendy? Do you want less blendy? This is one of those things where you have to choose for yourself. If you are getting, you know, if you got it, ordered it in merino, and the staple length, the way it is, it's breaking up really good, there's very few blendy sections, you may have to do some of that blending yourself if you like the blending. Do you want more definition? Do you want more blendy? So you can do that. If you've got the longer staple length, it's going to be harder to do more defined blocks because it's going to have staple length that has different sections. But if you have the shorter staple length and there aren't blendy sections, you can make blendy sections. Does that all make sense? I hope so. As usual, it's all going to be written down below in the blog. And sometimes when I'm doing these classes and talking to you guys, speaking makes more sense to people, and sometimes reading it will make more sense to people. So do what you need to do to learn this if this is what you want to learn. Okay, so we've got down how we're going to do it, how we're going to break it out. We've got down the staple length. How do you find the fiber? I'm going to set these, try to be careful because I do still want to finish spinning this. And over there, I have a couple of these that I pulled out from the Halloween stuff that I just dyed. Haunted Sleigh Ride and Bonfires. So the reason I pulled these two out to show you is they're very different in how they're dyed. This one, you can look at it in the braid that it's very splotchy. And this one, you can see that while there's splots of color, that there's more of it. That you can definitely see a purple section, a black section, and this crazy green section. So, why I chose these is because they weren't labeled yet, and I can undo them. We can see that in undoing it, and I don't recommend undoing it when it's on somebody's selling table or wall or whatever, but you can kind of get an idea. If you play with your own fiber that you have at home, you can get an idea of how it works. But anyway, so this is the one that I said was more splotchy dyed. So see that section right there? It's browny black on the top and not on the bottom. That's going to be a big blendy section. There's a lot of blendy sections in here because even when there's big splotches of color, they don't go all the way around. So I'm not saying you can't do that with it. I'm saying you can, but it's going to take a little bit more work, and you're probably going to have a little more blending, especially since this particular one is BFL. I'm going to have to break it apart and really take a look at it and kind of really make my piles very carefully and decide how blendy I want it to be. But this one could easily go from, you know, this lighter pale yellowy color into the deeper golds, oranges, into a nice mix of oranges and browns. I mean, some of these together would be really pretty, and on into just some solidy browns and blacks. And can you see that gradient? It can be done. You're just going to have to take a little bit of time and work at how you're breaking everything up. This one, when you look at it, it's probably going to be a little bit easier, especially being that it's BFL. It was dyed very similar to the skein that I use, or the hank that I used. That one's called Kindness, the blue and peach and black one. It's one of the colorways for a cause. Anyway, you can see that this was dyed much the same way as the other. You know, you have a definite purple section, a definite black section, and a definite acidy green section, back to purple, black, acidy green, and so on and so forth. So, and you could sort of see that there's larger sections, a definite, you know, big section of purple, big section of this, and big section of that, as opposed to looking at this braid, it does look a little bit more splotchy. So, depending on what you want to get out of your progression or gradient spin, depends on, you know, the fiber. You got to think of the staple length, and you got to think of how it was dyed. So it can all be made into, you know, any of these can be made into a gradient. You're just going to have to decide, you know, if you want a very definite gradient with more defined lines and more distinct colors, you're probably going to want to go for something that's got a little more splotchiness of color. Splotchiness, is that even the right word? More defined sections of color, like this one is, and choose a shorter staple length. Like, gosh, so many things are shorter than BFL. So, I mean, merino is obviously the one that comes to mind. Having been a spinner for almost 20 years. No, yeah. For about 20 years, I've been spinning. And so, you know, we always used merino versus Wensleydale. So if you ever watch me, and this is the examples I use, that's generally what I use. I mean, they're shorter than merino, like cashmere, but those aren't ones you generally find out easily for sale like these are. So thinking of, you know, you've got merino is pretty short, Targhee, Falkland, Polworth are all a little bit shorter than the BFL usually. And the longer side off of the BFL would be the other long wools, which would be things like Romney, Wensleydale, things like that. And it's not always easy to find all of these in mainstream purchasing areas. For a while there, we were getting a lot of crazy blends and a lot of breeds, and sometimes they're not always easy to find. But that's neither here nor there. If you're looking for hand paint, a lot of them are going to be more of the common breeds. BFL is pretty common. Wensleydale, Romney, not as common as it used to be a few years ago, but they're still out there. You've got merino, Polworth, and Targhee are pretty common. So if you're looking for the short staple, think, you know, and more defined colors, think of getting a shorter stapled one. And if you want it more blendy without having to work at blending it, then you can go for a longer stapled one. Whatever you choose, work at it. Ask your questions if you've got them. but it is really all just about experimenting and kind of making up all of your little piles here and just making up sections and deciding. I mean, you can see even just from looking at the piles as they blend that this way that they blend, you've got the peach all the way down more into the blue. And if I were to keep going, and you can break off big sections, but the way I was spinning it, I was spinning in smaller bits. And sometimes, see, that's a more blackish bit. There's one with blue. There's a blue and black. And then I've finally got into the blues. So you can see just by looking at the stack that's in front of me, the color progression and the way that it's going to go. I can go from this end too and pull. What's that, peach and black? Yes. It's a little more peach and black there. A little more dark. This is going to pull off into there. I don't need to keep going because I think you guys get the idea of how to do this. And I do try to make more distinct piles for myself. I kind of smushed them together so you guys could see how they progressed with each other. But I try to make more distinct piles for myself so that I can keep grabbing each one after the next and come up with something that is going to look a lot like this, a gradient or a progression, if that's what you want. So, happy spinning, folks.